Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse senior editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. The biggest story to come out of Washington this week really happened at the beginning of the week. Congressional negotiators were able to finalize a budget plan, and we were watching that for a couple of provisions that we thought had a very good chance of becoming included. Provisions that would have helped cotton and dairy producers across the country. Those provisions weren't in there. We've done a lot of coverage on sort of the blow-by-blow of how that happened. I'd really encourage you to especially read Phil's story that was in the Agri-Pulse newsletter this week, really just discussing how this all went down. But really the main question now looking forward is, Phil, where do we go from here?
That's a good question. Raises questions about getting a farm bill done. It probably makes getting a farm bill done in this Congress a little more difficult. It creates a bit of a budget hole in going into the next farm bill. Just to recap, the cotton producers had come up with a budget neutral way to get into the price loss coverage program in the commodity title. They're not in the commodity title right now except for marketing loans. And that fell by the wayside because Senate Democrats insisted that there also be a fix for dairy producers who are also looking to have some more funding or baseline in the next farm bill. That's not there either. And there's some other complications as a result of this not getting in this budget deal. And that's creates some problems for the more challenges for the agriculture committees on both sides as they try to write the bill. Now, new Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue, we talked to him this week in an interview, and this issue came up, and he knows that he's going to get requests both from cotton and dairy to do provide some help administratively. On the cotton side, it's very, very expensive because of the statutory legal restrictions on him. We could be talking about $1 billion a year. At least that was the figure that USDA had come up with when Tom Vilsack was secretary and rejected the proposal from cotton. And Secretary Perdue said there were budget constraints to doing what cotton wants. So we'll see. Future is very cloudy right now.
Mm-hmm. And in this situation going forward, keep in mind the name Mick Mulvaney, a former Tea Party activist, now the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget. Some kind of cotton solution done administratively is going to need his signature or his sign of approval.
Right. Anytime Sonny Perdue wants to spend money over USDA that's not in the appropriations, not appropriated, it's a good chance he's going to be talking to Mr. Mulvaney, and that could be, as you pointed out, he was aligned with the Tea Party when he was in Congress.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked a lot about that this week. We're not done talking about that as the Farm Bill process goes on. That's going to be something that's going to be very heavily weighing in on a lot of these conversations.
Yeah, we should also point out there's a lot of hard feelings and acrimony that came out of this. I've never seen anything quite like this on a farm bill, especially ahead of a farm bill, in the middle of a farm bill cycle. A lot of folks around town are shaking their heads. A lot of people in the House and the Senate are angry with each other. National Cotton Council is very angry with
Chairman
Debbie
Connolly
Stabenow,
had a statement that was certainly not subtle by any means.
Not subtle at all. And they kept it up afterwards. You heard with the farm broadcasters heard from House Ag Chairman Mike Conaway and Colin Peterson, the ranking Democrat on House Agriculture, and they were still
right, some very strong words, from both of those House Ag leaders. I'd encourage you to take a look at Agri-Pulse Daybreak from Thursday for the full text of those comments, because they certainly didn't pull any punches, and nor do I expect them to pull punches moving forward. Long story short on this whole matter, stay tuned. But I want to move on to some more comments that were made before a gathering of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting on Wednesday. Scott Pruitt made kind of an impromptu stop to the gathering. I was in the room for it. He was we were hoping to speak with him earlier in the week, but scheduling conflicts emerged and that just wasn't able to happen. They saw him walking around the Capitol Hill hallways on Wednesday morning, asked if he would come in and say a few words, and he did. During that conversation, he did make some news saying that he had hope that the Environmental Protection Agency would be able to get there, as he put it, on a Reed vapor pressure waiver that would allow for the sale of 15% ethanol fuel during the summer months. Currently, volatility issues, a lot of legal mumbo jumbo. Long story short, they can't sell it during the summer months. And so that's much to the chagrin of a lot of environmental folks and a lot of people that would really like to see the sale of 15% ethanol during the summer months. He said he's had hope that they would get there, but it's a matter of whether or not the statute allows it. Renewable fuels groups certainly feel that the statute does allow for it. It remains to be seen what the EPA interpretation of that statute is going to be. So that's certainly an issue to follow, because if they were to allow for the sale of E15, that allows for higher blended fuels, that allows for perhaps a stronger RFS, that allows for more blending of ethanol in the nation's fuel supply, something that would be a big victory to renewable fuels groups. So
it really pushes up the blend wall.
Right. And because the blend wall argument, as you may be familiar, this argument from oil groups and a lot of opponents to the RFS, that the nation just can't handle anything more than 10% of demand for ethanol in its fuel supply, that so-called blend wall that renewable fuels groups would really like to break through to prove their point on the RFS. So something to certainly follow there. We'll be watching very closely the Environmental Protection Agency to see when we can see some kind of an announcement or some kind of a ruling on a Reed vapor pressure waiver.
You got the sense he was pretty focused on this. I knew he was well versed in it.
Yeah, I mean, he was. That was a comment. Someone just the question, I believe, was ethanol producers would sure like to sell E15, and he said, yeah, and we're working on it. That's something we're looking at in internal deliberations right now. He was fairly non-committal on what that final result would be, but he certainly seemed to say that he was hopeful. I believe hope was the word that he used, that they could get there. It's just a matter of people have said he is a man that likes to stick to the letter of the law. I've heard as someone that is involved in one of these renewable fuels groups to refer to him as a brilliant conservative lawyer, and so he's going to want to stick to the letter of the law. And so, as he put it, it's whether or not the statute allows for it. Also want to wrap up this week. As Phil mentioned earlier, we did have the ability to talk, Agri-Pulse did, with the Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue in an exclusive interview this week. And Phil, kind of a wide-ranging conversation, but one of the things that came out of it ties to President Trump's proposed $1 trillion infrastructure investment and really how he sees the Department of Agriculture playing a role in that infrastructure investment.
Yeah, they actually have staff assigned to working on USDA's part of the proposal that the White House is going to come up with. This massive infrastructure initiative that the president wants to do. The secretary talked a lot about rural broadband and expanding rural broadband, the importance of that both to farmers in terms of increasing their productivity with high-speed internet service, but also the sociological implications of getting broadband, as they pointed, to keep kids in rural areas. If they don't have broadband service, that's one more reason to leave for the big city. And so that's he talked quite a bit about that. That's one of his very early priorities. Also, obviously, trade being part of the NAFTA renegotiations, and regulatory reform. We talked a bit about the rural task force that will be looking at ways not only within USDA but across agencies to address regulations that may be barriers to agriculture and economic development in rural America.
So certainly a lot of nuggets came out of that interview. I'd encourage you to take a look at agripulse.com. We've got the full write-up there for your reading pleasure of all of the things that they got into, kind of a kind of a policy-rich discussion as he heads to potentially make more news and more policy discussions in some of the coming weeks of his tenure. It's kind of hard to believe that he's only been Agriculture Secretary for about a week and a half right now. It seems like we've been talking about him for ages.
He had a lot of business on the shelf
Right.
to start get going with, so on his desk. I should say.
So we will continue to follow the developments in terms of infrastructure and trade and everything else that comes out of the Department of Agriculture, as well as other comments made by Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue and other officials as we move into these coming weeks and months. Certainly a lot of interesting things going on in the field of agriculture policy in these days. But I think that's going to do it for this week. For Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.